So I think line of reasoning is kind of this concept where I don't remember using the term before they redesigned the syllabus, but or the course exam description, but line of reasoning I feel like has always existed as just like a logical progression of ideas. And I think sometimes one of the things that my students struggle with is they understand like the parts of an essay. They know they need a defensible thesis. They know they're supposed to have body paragraphs with evidence and commentary that prove it. But I think sometimes they might struggle to, especially in a timed situation, make those connections clear to the reader. Like they know what they're trying to say.
Oh
But
yeah.
if I just go by what the page says at face value and I don't make any inferences, because on the exam, the reader won't really be able to do that, then there's things where it's like, oh, that's not quite connected there. Or it's we've kind of gone off topic a little bit, or maybe like the commentary is present, but it's really simplistic and things like that. So I think like for my students they understand the concept of line of reasoning, but I think when they go to try to do it under pressure, that's when we start to see things kind of like break down a little bit. And so hopefully through like practice and like more just exposure they get it. But I think that's the thing where students sometimes have the disconnect, and at least my students, is the second that we start going to like a timed anything, it's like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? What's a line of reasoning?
I
So that's
know.
where my students struggle.
Yeah, nice. Actually, we should have tossed that into the chat here too. So we got 27 people looking on here, and I cannot imagine that there are 27 people that all have line of reasoning figured out in their classrooms, or your students have it figured out in your classrooms. What are some of the concerns? There goes my camera. Hold up, hold up. Um, what are some of the concerns that you all feel like you see in your classroom when it comes to line of reasoning with your students, or what are some of the areas where you're kind of like, you know what? Sometimes I don't know what to do with line of reasoning because I work with a lot of teachers around the country, and when I mentioned line of reasoning, Beth, you're right. It's not something that we actually ever even said before. Um, we never even said it before the new read the articulation of the course and exam
Mm.
description. So what do you have going on in there, folks that are listening on line of reasoning, so that we can kind of say, hey, can we help you out here? But Beth, I do agree. The timing, when it comes to time things, kids all the time are like, oh my word, I thought I knew something until I was told I had to recall it in a question situation. Um, but yeah, toss anything in the chat for people that are listening. Um, One of the questions that I often get a lot, Beth, is what is line of reasoning? Um, and the reason why I get that question so much is because if you look in the course and exam description, it's not actually defined for us.
Mhm.
But Kelly here says this, and then I'll talk a little bit more on definition. Says that sometimes a good text model where kids can trace a line of reasoning helps them understand it. I agree with the breakdown when it comes to their writing. Oh, good, good, good. So trying to find a good model. Kelly, do you have a good piece that you model line of reasoning with? If you do, toss that title right in there. But Beth, I'm going to share my screen real quick. If you don't mind. Do you mind, Beth?
Absolutely. No, totally fine.
All right. So this right here is a line of reasoning packet that I use a lot. Um, and if you look here, I've got a few definitions of line of reasoning, and it's so we've got a line of reasoning is a logical sequence of claims that work together to defend an overarching thesis statement. A line of reasoning means a person's logical organization and cohesive presentation in which all pieces work together in service of an argument. And we have line of reasoning is a clear logical path leading the audience through reasons to a conclusion. Um, and so the problem with this, though, is that I've got three definitions here, and these three definitions all come from the same organization. Do you want to guess what that organization is, Beth?
Could it be the College Board?
I just say it starts with a C and ends with Olive Board. Yep. Okay. And there are three different definitions. And where I actually found these, one of them comes from the AP Lit CED, another one comes from the Lang CED, and another one comes from another thing that they published that I'm not going to mention. So, nonetheless, what I did was when I was starting to get into this line of reasoning thing, because I never thought about it before I um, saw the course and exam description and before I saw the rubrics, I was like, what do these definitions at least have in common to kind of help us get to where we want to be? Now, there is a question in the Q&A. It says, students don't understand the parts of the argument build on each other. I'm not sure how to get them to understand that concept. So Beth, essentially, right, what it said in the comments right there was that the kids don't understand how the argument creates a line of reasoning and how do we actually get them there. So what do you do with your students in relation to getting kids to understand that their arguments have to build on one another. And then I'll go back to the definitions of line of reasoning and how we can kind of create a cohesive one for our kids. But what about you in relation to that that question there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I try to point out to my students as we're reading a text in class is we try to identify the author's line of reasoning because I like them to analyze in chronological order instead of just kind of going on a scavenger hunt. And so I'll ask them questions and like things like, okay, well, why did they put the call to action at the end? And like after I've asked that question a few times, my students are like, yeah, we get it. You have to build to it. But the first time they're like, well, I don't know. Why does it go at the end? So I try to get them to think about structure, and sometimes we'll even talk about how when they're trying to convince me as their teacher of something, they make certain choices in a certain order, right? Like, so if you want an extension on your homework, you probably shouldn't just come up and ask me, "Can I have an extension?" Because I'm probably going to say no. But if you if you make certain choices, maybe depending on the circumstances, I would give you an extension. So we talk about how,
For me, that line of reasoning is before they ask, they better present me with some really delicious candy.
right?
I am easily bought with candy, and my students know it. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
I didn't
you're
mean to
fine.
interrupt your line of reasoning there, Beth.
Yeah, so I think like with line of reasoning, once they can understand that choices have to be made in a certain order in order to get the desired result from the audience, then when they're trying to write their essays, I'll ask them questions like, well, for rhetorical analysis, I really do try the chronological approach. Like, how do they begin like what's happening in the beginning? What are they doing in the middle? What are they doing at the end? But when they're writing their
Well,
own synthesis and argument, then it's kind of like, okay, well, which body paragraph should come first or which main idea? Like, because sometimes students won't really think about the order of their own paragraphs and they need to take a second to be like, oh, okay, it makes more sense if I say this first as opposed to this.
um, now a question for you here, Beth, because I know that you Space Cat. Like, so I get asked about Space Cat stuff all the time. Beth, I'm telling you, you got to make a Coach Hall writes Space Cat poster. I can get my artist to make the image for you if you want. It's not a problem. Just because I don't Space Cat, so people are like, "Can you make a Space Cat poster, Tim?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I can't. I just don't do it." And that doesn't mean it's wrong to do. I just can't make it successful in my classroom. Maybe I've just sucked too much. I don't know, right? But I know that you Space Cat, Beth.
Mhm.
This question right here says, is there a way that you can intermix the Space Cat with the LOR? Have you found a way to do that? Or is it kind of like you do line of reasoning with something a little bit different?
Okay, I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. So like,
It
um,
says here, if my kiddos can Space Cat the piece, can they find the line of reasoning?
okay, sort of, but like, I don't know. I almost teach them as like two separate parts of the process. Like I'll have students analyze the rhetorical situation, but then as they're determining the line of reasoning, we think about, okay, what are they doing? And then like in this part, like so let's say we're focusing on, I don't know, we'll keep it simple, repetition. I might then ask them to connect it to the like Space Cat, to the rhetorical situation. So like why are they repeating that word for that audience? Or like why is that word helpful to their message or their argument? So I think they like overlap a little bit. But I kind of teach them, I don't want to say I teach them as like separate skills, but like I usually will have students think about the rhetorical situation even before we read, because sometimes they know background info. And then, like, after we've read and kind of discussed it, we'll break up and identify the author's line of reasoning and then start to incorporate those elements of the rhetorical situation as well. So I think they can be used in tandem with each other. Yes, if I hope
But
that makes sense.
there is you have not included the Space Cat with the line of reasoning. It seems though, like if you're like, hey, so you know, the speaker starts by introducing him or herself every time, and then moves to this every time. Just doesn't work because we got different speakers for different. Sorry, we've got different speakers doing different things in different orders for different purposes. Is that the nature of it?
Right. So I
Yeah.
think like if you're trying to incorporate them, I could be wrong here, but I would assume you'd want to identify the author's line of reasoning first and then figure out, okay, why are they making these choices, which would be the C in Space Cat for this audience on this occasion. So yeah, they work together, but there's not like I don't think there's a way to directly incorporate line of reasoning into Space Cat. I think you can
Yeah.
have line of reasoning and then go into Space Cat that way, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. I think that you do kind of have to treat them as separate animals that work together.
Mhm.
That are yoked together. Here, we can analyze what the speech is saying all the way through its rhetorical elements and its purpose and whatnot. And now let's actually talk about the line of reasoning that we can construct with it. So Excuse me. Thanks. I do appreciate the pieces that were put in the chat, by the way, for some people that are like, oh, hey, these are good pieces for line of reasoning. But yeah, so I think that the nature of this is that though the line of reasoning and the space cat are separate, they actually connect together because the message is supposed to be cohesive, and that's basically what a line of reasoning is. It's a cohesive argument here. Okay. Um, and I think that Melissa, kind of just reiterated that in the comments there. So I'm glad that what do you do, Beth, to teach line of reasoning to your kids? And let's talk about like reading for one first and then creating their own. So let's do the reading first, because I've seen some cool things that you do where you like link stuff together or something. Like, can you explain what you do that for your kids?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
So
we'll take it, Beth. By the way, folks, you can ask questions about anything. Today, we're just going to talk about line of reasoning while we wait for questions that you ask about, whatever you want to ask about for this upcoming year. But anyway, sorry, Beth, for interrupting.
no, you're good. So I started posting pictures on Instagram, which Tim and I both have an Instagram. So if you're an Instagram person, follow us over there as well. Because my students, especially last year, really wanted more hands-on activities. And I would hear all the time about how they're doing these cool projects in history and science. And, we just annotate in English class. And I'm like, all right, gotta try to come up with something creative. So I was thinking of line of reasoning, and I was thinking about those paper chains that students make, like, for whatever reason in elementary school. And so what we did is I had different colored paper, and each color represented a different part of the essay. So they had like one color for their thesis, one color for topic sentences, one for evidence, and one for commentary. And I have directions for this that I can post in the chat in a second, because you can make it very complicated or you can make it much more simple. The first time you do it, I would just keep it pretty simple. But after we had read the text and analyzed it in class and determined the author's line of reasoning, they then made their own like paper chain, almost like a physical, like tangible outline. So they had to write their own thesis and their own topic sentences, and I let them work with a partner. And then they just put the paper chain together, and then I put them on the bulletin board outside my room because it was right around parent teacher conferences. So it's kind of like a nice little like 3D display to be like, hey, look, we're learning in here. So that was one that the students enjoyed, and it was something that, like, for some of them, the actual aspect of like making the links and like having to realize that stuff connects, somehow the kinesthetic quality of that really helped. And it's just something like different. Like, it's literally just like an outline that they're turning into a paper chain. So yeah.
Got it. Super cool. And that's always nice to have something for parents to kind of show off on Parents' Night when they come in, and it's like, oh man, and then it's like, didn't they do that in elementary school? And it's like, yeah, but this is like really cognitively beautiful work. Sometimes I feel like I get a bad rap for being a little bit too easy at times. And because I use a lot of Disney songs, and I use a lot of commercials and whatnot. And I'm like, trust me, this is the best way to deal with these things. When I do poetry in AP Lit, I start with how bad can I be from the Lorax? And I'm like, it's perfect. It is perfect. There's no doubt about it. I want to go back to, if you would permit me to do so, this nature of line of reasoning. Oh, wait, no, there is a comment in here that is not line of reasoning based, it's synthesis based. And hold on, there we go. It says, I am a first year AP teacher, my second year of teaching. Welcome to the profession, by the way, and welcome to teaching the best class that exists on the planet, just so you know. Yes, it's better than dual enrollment, by the way. Anyway, just wanted to shout that out there. And then it says, I'm beginning synthesis this week. What are some things I should focus on with this unit? Beth, do you actually Mark and Carly?
No.
Oh man, Beth, you let me down. I thought you were gonna be like, of course.
I do like it though. Actually, I had a tutoring student, I think 2 years ago now, who he's like, yeah, I've got this like synthesis assignment about these kids, and they're like texting, and I was like, is it Mark and Carly? And he's like, and I was like, okay, you got to tell me, like, like what are your thoughts? But he liked the assignment, but it was I haven't used it just because we introduced synthesis earlier on in high school. Like, they started in like freshman, sophomore year, but.
Yes.
If you have not done synthesis yet, definitely look at Tim's like high school drama synthesis, because it's very approachable, and like kids love it. And he's got merch for it. Like, you could show up with a Mark and Carly shirt, and your kids will think you're cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually show you all what that looks like right now, just for people that don't know. Okay, there we go. What's Mark and Carly? There we go. Let's actually check it out. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and we will get back to line of reasoning stuff here, folks. I don't want you to feel like we won't, but we are willing to interrupt our line of reasoning in order to address the needs that you all bring to us in the chat. So this right here is my files and resources page from thegardenofenglish.com. I just put that right in here. And here are a bunch of files and resources. Most of them are indeed absolutely free. Not all of them, but most of them. And you're going to notice that if I go down here and I keep scrolling down, there it is. It says specialty prompts. Okay. Now, this right here is a prompt that I made originally with my students. And then Katie Storms, who is just an absolute rock star, by the way, she re-edited this and updated it a bit. And then last summer, she and I actually made two prompts because we were getting a lot of heat for different reasons that I think is actually quite ridiculous. But we were like, you know what? Rather than just be complained to all the time, let's just make two prompts so people can choose what they want. It also worked out nicely because Synthesis has two types of prompts. They have factors-based prompts where it says, hey, examine the factors that blah, blah, blah. And then they have just argue your position, develop your position on based prompts. Both prompts require an argument. However, one of them requires kids to focus on specific factors that drive their argument as opposed to just producing their argument in total. But anyway, this right here, the reason why this prompt works out so nicely with your kids to start synthesis with is what it does is it just allows them to realize that they do the synthesis process in their everyday lives all the time. All this is some high school drama, okay? It's just two kids that might be breaking up because there might be separate love interests, but there might not be. And the truth is that they're not talking to each other. It's all hearsay. Everything here is hearsay. But as the kids work through these prompts where it's like, hey, what should Mark consider when going forward with Carly, or what develop your position on what Carly should do depending on what prompt you have. Excuse me. What the kids are doing is they are naturally getting involved in this drama, and they think about the sources, they think about the biases of the sources, they think about the potential biases of the sources, they think about the character of each person that's involved in this kind of like little fight. And that's what we want kids to realize, that research is. Before you make a claim about something, you need to actually look into what the source is saying, the biases of the source, where that source seems to be coming from, what the position even is, and then how do we put it all together. So in my classroom, what I do is I just give the kids the prompts cold, and I separate my kids into 4 groups, and I make 2 groups do prompt 1 and 2 groups do prompt 2, and they just have to write a letter to Mark. Actually, I think it's a DM. I think it's a direct message. And they just have to write a letter to Mark or to Carly and offer them some advice based on the sources that are here. But the point of this is to let the kids have a ton of fun, because they do, and then to help the kids recognize that they know how to do the research process. It's just not in an academic manner. So that's where I typically start with synthesis here. I also just put a synthesis playlist in, I'll stop sharing now, in the chat for folks. So that goes through how to break down a prompt all the way through how to write the whole paper. I'm in the process of rewriting all of my synthesis playlist videos so that they're new and they're flashy, not like my old boring ones. And I'll be taking care of commentary and conclusions, hopefully by the end of next week. They won't be out until the end of December, beginning of January, but they'll be written and filmed by the end of next week, I'm pretty sure. And I think that a lot of people in this chat have probably already done the Mark and Carly. So if you have a positive testimonial about it, then do so. Then toss it in there. Some people are like, my kids just couldn't get into it, and that's fine. It happens. I can't promise it every time, but I know that most of the time kids are pretty jazzed up about that. Anything else for synthesis though, Beth, that you're like, oh, boom, this is a must do as you look at things?
Okay, so do you know who came up with the dinner party idea? Because I always wanted to give credit, but I didn't know who the original creator was.
I don't know. You mean just the
Like
picture?
the concept.
Yeah, I do. You know what? Why don't you talk about that? I'm gonna get my AMSCO book because I know who made the concept. I'll go get it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so if you're introducing synthesis, one thing that you could try is something called a synthesis dinner party. And you can go super fancy with this. And like I've seen some teachers like decorate tables in their classroom. I did it digitally pretty recently, and it was not super fancy, but I made a Google slide where they did it. Yes, this is an awesome textbook. Thanks for the email, by the way. But the dinner party idea is like basically, let's say you have 6 sources. The way I did it is I had like 6 boxes around like a little table, and I told students you have to seat the sources like you would at a dinner party. And most of my students haven't been to a formal dinner party, but they can at least kind of understand from like family gatherings, like, oh, we don't put Uncle Joe by Aunt Susie because they always bicker about politics or something. So you have to like, I tell them, usually it helps if they find 2 sources that they think are very like opposite each other for whatever reason, and they put them at the end of the table, and then they kind of fill in. And I usually let them work with partners when they do this. And I tell them there's not really any right or wrong answers as long as you can justify it. So for when I have them do it, I have them make their little seating chart. And then I have them write me like a brief explanation as to why they arranged the sources the way that they did. And it's a way to help them understand the concept of a conversation of sources. So basically, the sources that have overlap or some kind of similarity, or at least the sources that wouldn't bicker at the dinner table can sit near each other. And that way they can start to realize as they're eventually moving toward writing an essay, okay, these sources can talk to each other, and maybe I could put them in the same body paragraph. Because when students only put 1 source per body paragraph and write like 3 body paragraphs, usually those essays are pretty disconnected. I like to see students try to put 2 sources, sometimes even 3, in a body paragraph to work on that conversation idea. So the dinner party activity is one that really works well for this. And it's a great like introductory activity as well.
All right. All right. I don't know who did the dinner party part of that, like turned it into an activity in class, because I've never heard that before, and it sounds delicious. But the actual concept of the dinner party was from Kenneth Burke, and he wrote it in The Philosophy of Literary Form in 1941. That sounds like an incredibly boring book, but it has turned into that activity that Beth just explained, and that sounds absolutely fabulous in my mind. And I'm like, ooh, I might dinner party that this year. Another thing too with synthesis, folks, as long as we're thinking about introducing synthesis, you might want to consider showing an episode of Chopped. And the reason why is because with Chopped, it's like, today we're making desserts, and it's like, here's your graham cracker, here's your marshmallow, here's your chocolate, and our secret ingredient today is fish eyes, right? And sure enough, as the kids watch this show, although the kids are watching the chefs use all of the same ingredients, no chef A is doing it the same. No chef B is like, I'm going to put the fish eyes here. I'm going to put the graham cracker here, the chocolate here, and the marshmallow here, and then try to present that. They take little samplings of each and they mix them in their own ways to make it look their own way, to make it appear on the plate their own way, to make it taste a certain way. They pull from different parts of the flavors to create this new kind of palette. And although it's the same ingredients, everyone looks different. And so having the kids kind of conceptualize synthesis like a version of Chopped is kind of a cool thing to do. And then, you can actually, let's be real, after Thanksgiving break, we all brought our papers home. We didn't grade any of them, okay? It might be kind of nice to grade some papers. You could throw a nice little 20-minute episode of Chopped on there in order to do that. Just something to consider. Beth, there was another question from the same person that asked about synthesis originally that I'm going to answer too. But it says here: is there anything else about the writing, just the writing skills, or are there any other concepts beyond the writing that you also focus on? There is one other thing that I also focus on, but I will talk about that in a moment.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things that I try to focus on. One, it's kind of a very basic concept, but I think it's important. I try to help my students understand how to do citations correctly because my students, most of them will go to AP Lit. Some of them take college English with me, which is kind of like a concurrent credit class, but it's not AP Lang. And in that class, they learn APA format. But one of the things that I've noticed that students sometimes do when they're writing a synthesis paper is they like to say something like, according to source B. And so we go over, okay, well, how can you use the original source's credentials, and how do you do a parenthetical citation. And most of my students do have a reference point for this, but I feel like we kind of do a mini lesson on citations in general, just because that to me is a skill that they'll need in the future anyway, but it can help the quality of the essay. Not that it would improve their score, but if you can make it sound like you're integrating your evidence more effectively, then it's going to help overall. So that's one thing that we do like a mini lesson on. And then when I think they're ready, which comes at a different point every year, we talk about addressing the counter argument. I don't require them to do it, but we do talk about what is the difference between like a counterclaim and a rebuttal, or a concession and refutation, and like how we can develop that. But I don't make it mandatory, because I've read a lot of essays where I think either the student thought they had to put it in there, or I don't know if they were going for the sophistication point or what, but it was almost like not the best, in my opinion, not the best use of their time in that particular essay. So we do talk about it because I want them to know that skill for like argument and synthesis, but not all of my students are equally ready to include that in their writing. So it's one of those things where I introduce it because I feel like they need to know it. But not all of them are equally ready to implement it in their own writing. So those are a couple things that we do talk about, though.
So another thing with synthesis is that so that my students don't get rusty with rhetorical analysis, because I kind of do rhetorical analysis and then I do argument and then I do synthesis. When I'm doing synthesis, I make my kids, when they get to the end of a source, I make them write purpose statements for that source. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, so-and-so writes this piece in order to highlight that, and they'll put the message of the piece there. And then they'll say, ultimately urging the audience to. And so what my students will do is they'll write that purpose statement kind of out at the bottom there. And every once in a while, I might be like, good, now go identify 3 rhetorical choices that are made, trying to build that in. Another thing that I do with synthesis to build in rhetorical analysis as well is I have a mini unit on unethical synthesis, where I use a clip from Bowling for Columbine. And the reason why is because, it's a really edgy film, and it was even when it was out, and now it's especially like poignant. But the truth is that Michael Moore, in the particular clip that I look at with them, utterly, just completely rips apart what Charlton Heston really said in a speech. And I'm not trying to defend Charlton Heston at all. Listen, folks, I am not even going to go into the politics of this. I tell my students all the time, no politics in my classroom. It's just the best thing to prove. No, it's the best thing to teach what I'm trying to teach. So basically, Michael Moore includes some clips of Charlton Heston in a speech that he made in Columbine about 2 weeks after the Columbine massacre. And he misrepresents almost all of the rhetorical situation. And then he picks and chooses like 4 lines from the speech. And I mean, Charlton Heston, it seems like he's the devil. Now, he might actually be the devil. I don't know. Okay, that's not what I'm going for here. I'm just showing the kids, when I show them the full speech from Charlton Heston, and then they see the clips from Bowling for Columbine, they're like, holy crap, that's not what Charlton Heston said. And I'm like, well, clearly it is what he said, because that's his face right up there in the film. And he's saying it like you're watching it. And so I talk about unethical synthesis, where you can't purposely manipulate what people say just to make it do what you want. You have to keep it in context. And so I also do a mini unit with that for skills. You don't have to do that. I do it with my kids, particularly because when my kids quote in their papers, I don't let them use more than 13 words. And because they're not allowed to use more than 13 words at a time, sometimes they might actually take one sentence in a counter argument paragraph, not attribute it to the person that the author is actually responding to, and then it's a whole mess. And I'm like, you got to make sure the context is clear and that you're using it accurately and adequately. Another thing too is that someone made a note about the AMSCO books. I'm sure Perfection will give out like sample copies or something, or maybe electronic copies. To be clear, everybody, I know that I put that right up in your faces, but I make no money off of any sale of any AMSCO book. So I don't want anybody to be like, why is Freitas got to be like that? No. Nothing. I don't make a penny off of any AMSCO sales at all. Brandon, Lauren, and I wrote a book that we think is good, but it also had the information that we were looking for when Beth asked for it about the dinner parlor. So that's it.
So there's one question in the chat that I think I can answer super quickly, but I don't want to skip Eileen's question either, because I think that is a question that is super important as well. But Anne had asked, is there anything beyond acronyms for helping students with finding and remembering information for the argument prompts? So I have my students do quick writes, and I'll put the link in the chat. And then I had them do, I called it like a Q3 database. I'll put the link for that as well. But that was just kind of like before the exam, getting them to think about topics that they could write about very well. So either personal experience or historical events or figures maybe that they had learned about in history class. Because a lot of my students also take APUSH. So when they realize that the stuff they're craving for in APUSH could potentially be evidence in question 3, that's really helpful. So basically, it was just kind of getting them to narrow their focus and focus in on a few different things that they could possibly write about well. And a couple of my students actually did use things that they had put in their database on the exam. What it was and to what extent, I don't know, but they were like, yeah, that assignment was helpful. So I'll put those links in there. The quick writes we do weekly, and I check them at the end of the semester, or at least that's how I'm doing it this semester. And I know, Tim, you have something similar where you're having your kids write about like personal experience and things like that.
I'll show that right now.
Yeah, it's just a good way to get them used to writing, like almost like mini specific evidence, basically.
Yeah. So my kids right now, we're doing rhetorical analysis and whatnot, but they've been doing this since the beginning of the year. Every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks, they're required to turn one of these in. And so I've got like a total, it's 2 every time. So they're basically producing 8 pieces of evidence, and they're describing it in 3 to 5 sentences every time. So my kids know it's got to be 3 to 5 sentences tops for each piece of like thing that I'm asking them for. And it's, hey, tell me about your personal experience in your lives, experience of acquaintances. Tell me about media experiences that you've had. Tell me about cultural and historical knowledge that you know. And the whole point of this kind of activity with them is to get them to consistently think about, hey, what are these big experiences in my life that I have to mine for? Because the first time they did this, it was easy. They could mine 2 very impactful experiences. The next week, it got a little bit harder. And now all of a sudden they're like asking grandma for stories, which is great because that's what I want, right? When they get to the acquaintance one, they're like, my grandmother did this when she was a kid, and here's how this worked, and blah, 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 blah. But the point of it is that when we get into arguments starting next week, oops, hold on, sorry, I just went to the wrong screen. When we get into arguments starting next week, then I'm going to pull them out and say, hey, listen, let's look at these argument prompts. How many of you have an example from what we've done already this year, this kind of database that we're collecting that can fit with that? And I make them handwrite these and whatnot. I want to start showing them that that's what this is for. But the day before test day, we will have gone through this process, I think, 8 times. And so because of that, 8 times, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to have 64 different things that could possibly be examples for their exams. And they'll have been written about precisely in 3 to 5 sentences. And that the night before, they can just flip through and be like, okay, what are these big things that I know about history and in my own life and whatnot? And the chances of them not having 2 things that will fit with an argument prompt are slim to 0 in my mind. So that is that. Beth, there was another question you wanted to answer, yeah?
Yeah, there was another one in the chat, and this one I thought was really interesting because I sort of wondered this too as an early AP Lang teacher with one of the prompts that I did. So it was basically like, how steep is the penalty for students who don't concisely address the synthesis prompt? But then it says one prompt said to write a letter to the Board of Ed about a curriculum, and many didn't formulate it as a letter. There's a prompt that I did. I haven't used it recently. I've kind of made my own, but there was one about like creativity in the classroom. It's an argument prompt. And it says in the directions, write a letter to the school board. And so when I gave that to my students, and then we looked at it, and then I showed them the sample essays, the kids who wrote it for the exam that the College Board put out, it wasn't letters, they were just essays. And my students are like, wait a minute, but it says write a letter. And so I don't think the College Board, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they're gonna phrase the instructions like that anymore, where like the whole write a letter thing, and even if they say that, it could just be an essay. Is that right?
So I actually think that they might still phrase it that way, give you some audience. I think right. But if kids just write an essay, it's not a problem.
Because either way, you're being argumentative and persuasive, right? So if we see something that says like, dear school board, and then but they still have a coherent argument, and
Yeah.
that's fine. And if we see one that's just literally like an essay and there's no salutation or whatever, it's also fine. So
Yeah.
I would tell kids like they like basically keep in mind what the task is. Like, if you're being told to argue and develop a position, then do so. But yeah, I
You
do
know,
think the directions sometimes make it confusing.
I agree, but there is one other thing too, especially if you have that kid that's really creative, and you don't want to tell this to your whole class, folks, because it's going to be a nightmare. Okay, but when you have that kid that's really creative, and that student gets a prompt that says, argue your position on the relationship between certainty and doubt, um, and the kid's like, I kind of wanted to turn it into two characters, one being certain and one being doubt, and have them have a conversation. As long as there's a thesis in there where one of them claims what their relationship is, I hate you because we're so opposite. Boom, that's a paper. Okay, that's an essay. Um, but rather than turn it into a play, I know that one year a kid envisioned himself as as someone being against women's voting rights, and this was the Florence Kelly year. And he was like, I stood there in the audience and I heard her do this and I was moved to this. And I heard her do this and I was moved to this. And here's why I was moved this way. And at the very end, he was like, wow, I really do know that child labor is awful and that women absolutely must have the right to vote. Right. And so he wrote it in like this first person perspective and whatnot, totally scored the highest score you can get on an essay because it was brilliant. And so, if I have a student who's like doing the windmill prompt and the student's like, can I actually like be like, can I pretend that it's my town, my town zoning board that wants to zone for windmills? Go on ahead. If it's going to make it easier for you to write a letter to your town zoning board, as long as you do what the argument requires, I don't care. It's a good thing. And so you can be flexible. But like I said, you don't want to tell all your students that because then you're going to have all your kids like, oh, I'm going to just go do this creative thing. And they're going to totally botch the whole thing. So we definitely don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and there's real world applications of it too. Like I've seen teachers, have their students write a letter for not necessarily because of a prompt, but like, write a proposal, write a letter,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So you can, if you want to have your students practice that, you can make it kind of fun.
Yeah,
As
I do it with letters to the editor. So every year, at the end of the year, every year, my kids have to submit a letter to the editor, and it's cool to watch what happens, especially when the major newspapers pick them up. And I actually had one student a couple years ago who got the focal spot on the letter to the editor page with the picture. So like only one letter to the editor gets the picture and the focal spot. And the editor actually called her and then called me. And like, he was like, I couldn't believe it. She was willing to just engage with this topic because it was something that nobody else was engaging with at the time. And it was something like investing practice for children or something like that. And they had been covering it for like 3 weeks in the newspaper. And apparently she knew about it. It was pretty cool. Beth, can I answer this question about timed writing?
Yes.
All right, folks. So it says here, I need to start giving my students timed writing practice. I know it's late, but where should I start? Should I use some FRQs in AP Classroom or on the College Board? Folks, first of all, I don't want you to ever compare your classroom to somebody else's. We get, social media moves us to do that an awful lot. I want to let everybody know, and I have no shame in saying this at all. I have not given my students a timed writing yet this year. My students' first timed writing starts next week. Okay. And that will be their first actual timed essay for me. Teach the kids that are in front of you. Lay the skills early, and then you can give them a million timed writings as it comes closer to test day. But if they can do the skills, and they don't have to think so much about the skills because they've got it down pat, you can then just do the timed writings and practice after January. Okay. So that's the first thing that I want to point out. The second thing too is this though. Don't think that you can't do timed writing before you give timed writings. I encourage you to time everything that your kids do. I'm like, boom, you all have a thesis to write. You got 8 minutes to do it. Y'all got a topic sentence to write here. You got 4 minutes to do it, right? And do things that will put a little bit of pressure on them. But then after they do that, share them out and let your kids revise. Say, you can revise that. You can revise that. And the reason why is because you want them to deal with the pressure. You want them to execute. But by giving them the opportunity for a non-pressure revision, it's easier to grade because you get better stuff. And when someone hears something else that somebody else said that's way better than what they wrote, I'm like, good, why don't you just nab that right now? And as they're processing it in their own mind and it goes out their hand, guess what? They're building their skills. So put the pressure on in smaller ways than just always doing it with a timed essay. If you're given tons of timed essays throughout the year, folks, your life will be miserable. Now, Beth, I'm going to talk about one other thing here real quick. I'm going to let a cat out of the bag that we talked about a little bit earlier. Folks, the next month, okay, Beth and I, and we are incredibly grateful to Applied Practice for this, by the way, are going to start doing scoring practice with y'all. So I contacted the CEO of Applied Practice, and Applied Practice gives away they don't give away mock exams. What they do is they provide mock exams for students, and you get detailed feedback for them if your school pays for them. And I think it's like $12 a mock exam or something like that. Okay. And the kids could take them online, or they could take them on paper. And then you just send them out. Applied Practice scans them in. They send them to their readers. They applied detailed feedback. Kids get a potential mock score. And if they take it online, it's timed like an actual exam. If you take it in person, you got to time it yourself. I do it every single year. Okay. However, anyway, Applied Practice agreed to let us use their released test materials to actually do scoring stuff with y'all. Now, I only bring this up because in terms of timed writing, in February of every year, end of January or beginning of February every year, I do give a timed mock exam, and it is required for my kids to take it, and they have to be in school on that Saturday. Now, if there's an extenuating circumstance to why they can't, whether it be work, whether it be, dog died or something like that, hopefully not somebody else, I will tell them, then you have to take it at home and submit it to me. And so it is required, and I give them a quiz grade just for taking it. But anyway, so Applied Practice is going to let us use their mock exam stuff for December, January, and February. And we'll go over, how to score with the rubric and whatnot. But that I will tell you that every year that I give out the mock exam, my students cherish that time because they're like, it taught us that we had to pick up the pace here. It gave us the full experience so that when May came around, it wasn't our first rodeo. Like, it's one of the best things that you could ever do for your kids for the mock exam. And if any of you want information about that, I can put a link in the chat in just a moment for that. But we're going to use Applied Practices materials starting next month. So just a heads up for that. But also the other timed writing element there is just do quick timed things, topic sentences, thesis statements, stuff like that.
Yeah, even just a paragraph. Like I've had my students, I've timed them for like 20 minutes, like, okay, write a paragraph, and then like they get to revise afterward. But anytime you can time them, it helps them start to develop that internalized pacing as well. So when students take the exam, one of the things I ask is, how did it feel? Not what is on it, how did it feel? And they're like, oh, it was kind of like class, it was like the timed exercises that we do, and they felt very comfortable with it. So if you do little timed exercises, it helps take away some of that panic. Especially if you can kind of simulate, like I've done it to where it's like, okay, here's a prompt that you've never seen before. I'm going to time you for, let's say 10 minutes. I want you to just read and annotate. If you're done reading and annotating before the time is called, start to write a thesis or plan, but that kind of thing. And that way then we go over it as a class, but that way they're getting used to, here's something in front of me that I've never seen. Let me compose myself and compose my thoughts before that kind of thing. I think it can really help as well. So definitely do small timed activities. It's very much going to help your students.
For sure. And also somebody said, should you just use College Board stuff? And the answer is no. If you were to even go to the Garden of English, we've got tons of free files and resources here for you to do fun stuff with your kids instead of just lousy prompts. Katie Storms made this one, by the way, so she's just a rock star. She made this, what should we do with dead malls synthesis prompt, right? So if you were to check this out, you've got an entire synthesis element here. There we go, right? About how dead malls should be used. All your sources are already found and stuff like that. This is a quality source. I mean, a piece of equipment that Katie did for you here. There are some that relate to the different holiday seasons here, or the American Dream, and whatnot. So just think about, where can I find other resources where we can actually access? And these resources are free here, folks. If it's Halloween and you want to do prompts there like that, this holiday season packet is one of my absolute most favorite packets to use with my kids, because the synthesis prompt is, what's the meaning of the holiday season? There are some good rhetorical analysis prompts in there, and the argument prompt is really awesome. And I'm not going to say it out loud because you might have little kids around you, and I'm not gonna ruin their lives. But nonetheless, so just think about, there are resources out there outside of AP Classroom. In fact, I think that a lot of times they're much more fun, they're much more engaging, and if your kids are engaging with the skills and they're still academic in nature, then when they have to do something boring like eminent domain, they're going to have a much better shot at doing it. Yeah, time paragraphs, 15 minutes, Patty. Yeah. When I do anything timed, I always say, what's 4 minutes more than what I actually expect the kids to do it in? And that's what I give them for a time. And then when the kids actually beat that time, I'm like, oh, y'all beat that by like 6 minutes. So next time we do this, you're not getting 15 minutes, you're getting 9. And they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yep, that's right. Your fault, not mine. That kind of a thing.
Yeah, I say 15 to 20 just because sometimes, like, the first time I do a timed thing, I give them more time just to
Absolutely.
accommodate everybody, and then we scale back to, like, what I really want it to be.
Yeah.
Because, some students, they just need that extra time. Because if I started them where I really want them to be, then it's like, oh, I can't do it. But if I give them extra time, then it's like, okay, see, you can. Now we just got to work more quickly.
I really appreciate you bringing that up, Beth, particularly because when I do my first time writing, I give them 84 minutes, but they have to do a rhetorical analysis, and I require that they write a thesis for an argument prompt. Now, we haven't even gone over an argument yet. Then once we do argument, I give them 84 minutes, so it's still the same amount of time, but they have to write the argument essay, a thesis and topic sentences for the rhetorical analysis, and a thesis for a synthesis essay. But I give them the sources for the synthesis essay the night before, so they kind of have an idea of what's going on. And so I don't change the time, I just kind of increase the task that goes in it. And so anyway, that's just the nature of that. Patty, I do grade with the AP rubric. Beth, do you grade with the AP rubric?
I do. Most of the time. Now, for like, if I'm just assigning a paragraph, I kind of modify it. Like, I look at the expectations, but I don't necessarily use the 1 through 6 scale. But like, I have sort of my own, like, okay, do they have a topic sentence? Is it a clear idea? How's their evidence and commentary? So I look for the things on the rubric, but I don't necessarily use the rubric for a paragraph. But for a full essay, yes, because I want them to be evaluated based on how they're going to be evaluated on the exam, with the exception that I do half points. So half points kind of help my students a little bit in the grade book. Usually it's to reward them. I've only had to do it a couple times, but every once in a while I'll do a half point for a thesis. If it meets the exam expectations, but not my personal expectations, I give them a half point and not a whole point. But usually I hammer in the thesis, like to the point where like they at least do that. And then the half points in the other rows, I have a lot of essays that I give like a 2.5 out of 4 or a 3.5 out of 4, because either I can see that they're trying, or for the time of year that it is, it's above, the mark or something, or like it's just kind of in between. Also, I keep track of their scores. Obviously, we all have grade books and stuff, but I've noticed if I give a student like the same, like 1-2-0, let's say, and they get that multiple times, even if it's different types of essays, then they start to kind of get down on themselves and, oh, I can't do this. I'm never going to be more than a 1-2-0. And it's like, first of all, you're more than a score. But second of all, like, I've seen kids be like, I got a 2.5. I'm improving. And like, it might've been the tiniest thing, but it means something to them. I also have students who, they want that sophistication point. And like, sometimes I'm like, it's August, like, welcome to AP Lang. We don't need to worry about that right now. But I will give it sometimes as like a half point if I can tell that they're trying. Also, like, admittedly, there's a few times where I've seen an essay and I'm like, I don't know if it would get the sophistication point on the exam, so I'm just going to give it a half point because, it seemed like they were really trying. So I think sometimes, a half point can be a way to help students and help yourself as well. And it adds a little bit more flexibility with the rubric. So I do half points.
Yeah, I score with the rubric all the time. It makes things significantly easier for me. I have a sliding scale. I have a video for it on YouTube if you're interested in seeing that sliding scale. You can actually also access it right on my website. I can show you where you can find that. It's very, very easy. let's go over here. Let's go to the Garden of English. All right, .com, and we're gonna go to files and resources. Okay. I have my syllabus right here. So if this is my syllabus for Lang, if you were to click on it and scroll down, this is my sliding scale right here. And I don't do half points like Beth does. I just play with the grade in here. And you'll notice that as for terms 1 and terms 2, because I work with 4 quarters, these are kind of what if the kids would score a 6 on an essay, I'll score them between a 95 and a 100. That stays the same all the year. But notice how my grade ranges then begin to open up just a bit as the year goes on. And I won't actually fail a kid until term 4. And I have to be honest with you, I've never failed a kid on a timed writing. It doesn't happen because term 4 is the first time of the year that they can do it. If they attempt a timed writing, they'll most likely be fine. And there's no reason for me to fail them because they've at least attempted it. And let's try to build those skills there. So that is something that I have right there.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat about, and you can speak to this about the applied practice and whether it's worth the money. But before you do, I just want to say, like, if it's not in your school's budget, you can still do a mock exam. Our school uses the previous year's AP Lang test. Actually, it's not just our school; it's kind of like a state thing. We have like a state mock exam, and so I don't tell the kids that's what it is. And weirdly enough, they don't figure it out right away either because we break it up. They do multiple choice from AP Classroom and synthesis as their semester test because they have like a 2-hour block that they have to sit for an exam. And then when they come back at end of February, that's when they do the second half of their mock exam. And that's the stuff that like a group of teachers from my state, we sit there and we score and stuff. And so we use the previous year's test, and you can kind of make your mock exam whatever you want. But I like applied practice. It's just not in our school's budget at this time. But like, so if you're in a similar situation, then make your own mock exam, but absolutely have kids do it at least where they're writing 2, if not 3 essays in a like one sit down time period, because most of us don't have classes that long. So they can't get used to that. Like they need to get used to their hand hurting. They need to get used to having to pace 2 essays. And yes, their hand is going to hurt. I actually had a kid ask me one year if he should start and he was so serious. And he was like, should I start training? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like with a stress ball or something, like, can I he was being completely serious. And I was like, and he's like, well, you used to coach like high school soccer. Like, is that like, can I condition for the AP test? And I was like, let's try it and you tell me how it goes. He was precious, but in the South we say bless your heart. No, they need to get used to that, like that feeling of managing their own time and also having to write way more in one sitting than they're ever really used to. So definitely do a mock exam in whatever way your school will allow. But Tim, I don't know, maybe you could speak to applied practice a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been using applied practice for my mock exams ever since I've been able to. And one of the reasons why I like them is because I don't have to think about anything. Like it goes out to other scorers, it goes out to like everything is there. It's less that I have to do. The only thing that I sometimes have to do, and you'll find this with any mock exam company, like Marco gives mock exams too, and whatnot, is that sometimes you're not going to agree with the score. And so when my kids get their mock exam scores back, I will go over each essay with them and I will just say, hey, listen, did you get the thesis point? If a kid says no, I will make that kid read his or her perceived thesis back. And then, because most of the time you're going to get the thesis point. And so if the kid says no, I'll be like, give yourself the thesis point. And then we'll go from there. Every once in a while, I have a kid who's like, I really think I wrote a much better paper than what I scored. And I'm just like, let me just check it out after school. And if I think it's better, I just change it. I just change the score for the kid. But if I give, well, let's go back to when I was in the public schools. We would give about 215 mock exams a year, and we would probably change the score on 6 of them. And that's like change the score on like one of the essays on like 6 of them. And then one year when we actually thought that consistently it scored low because we had a large sample size of like 215. We said, like, we called applied practice and they were so awesome to work with. They were like, you know what, we'll just send them out to different readers and have those different readers read them and we'll see if we can get better scores for them. And the reason why it's like that is because at the reading, like you're brainwashed into what the scoring guide looks like. Like you are actually brainwashed. Um, and because you're all together and you're all talking about it, or well, you're supposed to be. And not, not so much since COVID, but there are a lot of like safety barriers in there to kind of make sure that people are on the same page for the most part. It's harder to do that when you're not like bringing people collectively together and having a point of contact and things like that. But I've never once not felt like I have not gotten a significant amount of value for like the $12 or whatever it is to take that. For me personally, right? I can't speak for anybody else. And Beth is right. There are other ways to get mock exams. The AMSCO book has a full practice test at the end of it. There are 3 practice exams, I think, on AP Classroom that you can print out and give your kids. And there are other resources. Marco has practice tests. Marco has free practice tests. And I hope you all know that I love John Muscatello over at Marco Learning. He's the CEO over there, and he's an incredible human being. So there are plenty of options out there for free and paid for mock exam services for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a question in here. Priscilla asked, how can I succinctly explain the difference between the synthesis essay and the argument essay? Which is funny because I have this on a list of videos that I want to make at some point. But the way I explain it to my students is just that a synthesis is an argument with sources. So the skills are essentially the same. It's just now you have sources to draw from for your evidence. And I mean, that's about as succinct as it gets. But I think if they realize that a synthesis essay is an argument with sources, then it helps. And then I teach synthesis before argument. So I still tell them that it's an argument essay with sources. But when I pivot to argument, then I say, so it's kind of like a synthesis essay, but now you have no sources. You are the source of the info and you can draw upon current events, personal experience, that kind of thing. And in case anyone is curious, like Tim does argument, then synthesis. Well, we both start with rhetorical analysis, and then he moves on to argument and then synthesis. I start with rhetorical analysis. I move on to synthesis and argument. We both have very successful results. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. But if you can get students to realize that synthesis and argument are very similar, I tend to spend less time with argument because we cover more of it in synthesis. And I think last teacher chat, you mentioned that you spent a little bit less time with synthesis because you had covered so much of it with argument.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, basically, they overlap quite a lot.
I did get a question here about like when we do teacher chat scoring next month and whatnot, do you need an applied practice license? The answer is no. Beth and I are not going to be able to give out the readings that we have, but you'll be able to see them on the screen. We'll bring them up on the screen and we'll talk about them and we'll talk about the scores and everything like that. So we can't just give out the materials, but we can talk about what to look for when you're doing scoring with your kids. Okay. And that's how that will work throughout the process here, because they still hold on to their questions and their samples, particularly because they still use them for secondary practice tests and things like that. But that's how that works. But you don't have to go purchase an applied practice license or anything like that. I talked to Karen and I said, look, this is what we'd like to do. Would you consider sponsoring such a thing? And she said, absolutely. And that's another reason why I like working with them, is just because their CEO, like when you work with them, you work with their CEO, and she's just the best, in my mind, at least. Beth, I know that we're running a little overtime. Do you mind if I say just a couple more things here?
No, not at all. Although there is one quick question I think we could answer from a new teacher. Says, yep. Do you have to include a counter argument? And the answer is no, you do not yep. have to. In fact, I tell my students, unless you know it's going to be good, don't put it in, because I feel like sometimes students force it. So they do not need a counterclaim and rebuttal or a concession or refutation. They can have one, but it is not required. So they don't get penalized if it's not there.
Yeah. Amy, I know that Amy asked a question about the mock exam stuff in the chat too. Amy, if you want more information, like the phone number to my business is on my website. Call me tomorrow after 4 p.m. Eastern time, and I can talk to you more about it. I just don't want to spend too much time talking about that here. We can talk about one-on-one and whatever your concerns might be, if you want. So you can find my phone number on the website, thegardenenglish.com. Okay.
Also, quick plug in case y'all want to continue this conversation elsewhere. Tim and I have a Facebook group called The English Coaching Garden.
Oh yeah.
The title is super original.
Yeah, I know, right? Let's see.
I'll put a link to it in the chat, but it's a Facebook group, and basically it's for all secondary English teachers, not just AP Lang. But welcoming members in. Please make sure if you sign up that you answer the questions that you.
Oh, we've had a lot of people not answer the questions, and like honestly, the biggest thing for Beth and I, or for Beth and me, is to not have to deal with the political nonsense that happens in a bunch of other like what pieces. So, like we have very clear rules about the politics side of things, and people just aren't answering the questions. They're just like, boom, let me in, and they don't answer if they're a teacher, and they don't answer the political questions, and it's like, sorry, if you're not going to answer those questions, we're just not going to let you in.
Yeah,
And that's
but
not because we're
please,
jerks,
like,
but
come over there and post your questions, because right now the group's a little quiet. Tim and I have been kind of working on a couple other things, but I promise the group will be more lively in the future.
and not
Um,
only that, but it was also built for us because so many people ask so many questions of us across different sites, whether they're WIT sites or Lang sites or just AP teacher sites. And we were like, we got to get these in one spot because, or we got to try to get them in one spot because we are pulled in so many directions that people think we're like ignoring them or we're being scumbags. And it's like, we're actually really nice people who really care to help others. So please don't misjudge
or we
us.
feel bad. Like, I feel
Yeah,
bad if I'm like, did I answer that person? Like,
right.
so yeah, it's never, no one's ever a bother. Please feel free to reach out. But we would love it if people would join that group and ask questions there. And if you're part of the group and you see a question that you can answer, please answer. Like, it's not just a Tim and
Yeah,
Beth like
no, no.
answering questions. It's we want to have that community as well. And we're not trying to replace any other online groups. We're just trying to kind of get our people together and to support each other further.
Absolutely. And you know what? There's a lot of people that do this job a lot better than I do. For some reason, people just ask me questions and I'm like, oh, you should ask that person because that person knows way more. All right. So I want to just talk about one other thing here. First of all, once again, if you donated today, please make sure I have your email in a comment in that donation or email me. I'm going to put my email address right here. If you donated and you're afraid I don't have your email address, email me there. You will have a link in your inbox tonight. It'll be there before midnight. I can promise that. I got to go home and I got to put my kids to bed, and I got 5 of them, and it's like a hostage situation and stuff like that. Also, I wanted to just talk about one more thing about line of reasoning because that's what we started with tonight, and then we kind of shifted to your questions, which is totally fine. But I want to just talk about how I define line of reasoning because this is what makes it easily teachable. Okay. So when I do line of reasoning with my students, and luckily this is a recorded video, so you can go back and listen to it because I don't have my writing pad to write in on this right now. But when I do line of reasoning to teach it to my kids, I define it as the complex interplay of how the thesis guides the topic sentences, how transitions interrelate the paragraphs, and how all in some way relate to a unifying idea or message. And the reason why I do it that way, folks, is because my kids need to realize that they're going to find a thesis or they're going to create a thesis. They're going to look at their own topic sentences and they're going to make sure that there are transitions that establish relationships between them so that their paragraphs are related. And then they're going to have to note that in their commentary of their paragraphs at all times, there needs to be some message or argument that's always central. And so because of that, that's how I work with line of reasoning with my kids. And I created this definition just by looking at what are the commonalities between these three disparate definitions. And I said, okay, a thesis is very teachable. Topic sentences derived from a thesis are very teachable. So in my classroom, I teach a thesis. Then I teach kids to write topic sentences. Then I teach kids to add transitions into their topic sentences. And then I teach them how to put evidence in their paragraphs and then unify that evidence in their commentary around the common idea or message that they see. And that can be done with rhetorical analysis. That can be done with argument and synthesis because it's all the same thing. What does your thesis say? How do you create topic sentences from your thesis? And then you move on from there. So that's the nature. That's just part of how I teach line of reasoning, but that's one of the things that I really focus on. And I want to make sure I got that out there because I know that we started at the beginning of our time together this evening for that.
Oh, someone asked, will the files be related to line of reasoning? They are loosely related. I think one of my video notes is about question 3, line of reasoning, from a video that I created. And I think Tim and I both had synthesis videos as well.
Yeah, well, no, today I have a video for reading synthesis sources quickly. So I've got a video guide for reading synthesis sources quickly. I've got a video guide for writing a strong thesis statement, but how it will actually create a line of reasoning.
Mhm.
And then I have another video about multiple choice and like how you can really work through multiple choice and kind of know what you're doing there. So we don't always correlate our videos with what we talk about at our times. We just give out just 3 video guides at a time.
In the
Uh,
future, we will try to coordinate a little bit better, but I think
yeah.
this month we were both kind of like, okay, this is what we have. But yeah,
Yep.
some of the content does relate to line of reasoning because like you can use Tim's thesis video to help introduce the concept. I have a Q3 line of reasoning video that has video notes for this month as well. So we try to just kind of choose different videos each month. That way, in case people are continued supporters, they don't get the same info
Yep.
and that kind of thing. And so yeah, basically, it'll be loosely related, but not exactly. And these video notes can be really helpful if you have over the next couple weeks, if you're, let's say you're missing a day and you need something to have your students do, this can be something that they can just kind of watch the video, learn something, document their knowledge. And I take it as a completion grade, because we have to have at my school 2 grades per week. So I don't give a lot of video notes assignments, but like there are times when I'm like, okay, this is what is best for them this week. So, yeah. And if you guys have used these video notes and they're helpful, we would love to know that as well.
Yeah. And if they're not helpful, tell us and we
Yeah.
can
Like if we could do it differently,
yeah.
tell us.
I'll try to figure something out that will make things more worth your while. I envision that the video notes are like, hey, you know what? I need time to grade, or I need to, I'm gonna have a sub here, and I know that we're working on rhetorical analysis. I can assign 2 videos, one for Beth, one from Tim, or 2 from Tim, or 2 from Beth, or whatever, and that will take care of the lessons for the day. So please remember, folks, if you did if you did donate today and you're looking for a link, I need your email address. So please make sure that gets in the comment of the donation, so that it makes it easier for me. You'll get it, like I said, before midnight tonight. Beth, I don't know. Is there anything else besides hey, see you next month?
Answered it all. I think we've answered everything in the Q&A tab. If we missed something, because I think a while back someone had asked for clarification about the quick rates and stuff, so that might have been the only thing we missed. Which the quick rates, in case that person is still here, the slides that I put in the chat, basically I let my students pick which prompt they want to answer, and it's very like student choice driven. But I also have had my students for 2 years, so I'm kind of used to that, and they're used to that. But if you're just starting out, I would maybe choose a specific like prompt that you want to have them answer, and I would assign maybe like 1 a week or whatever rotation you want to do. But the slides are a bunch of prompts that are just options, and you could do with them with as little or as much as you please. But I tried to keep it pretty versatile. So yeah.
All right, Beth. Well, I'm going to shut this down, and I'm going to know that I have to go to school tomorrow, and not particularly want to, but we got to do what we got to do.
Yes, absolutely. And just in case people are joining us next month, it's going to be on the 18th because the last Sunday of the month, I believe, is Christmas.
Yes.
So
I'm going to be in Florida so I'm not joining up on the 25th, Beth. I don't know about you, but I ain't gonna be there.
Love y'all, but not on the 25th. I think we'll do it on the 18th. And also, Tim and I both have Instagram or on Facebook. So please reach out if you have more questions. And we also mentioned this on our social media in case you're like, oh, I forgot what date she said. Let us know. We will post about it there as well.
Yep. Awesome. Beth, I really appreciate you, and I want you to have a great night.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Have a great week.